What is going on, everyone? Happy Sunday. We're finally back. It's college football season, and you're probably wondering, Jack, you got your own show. I know. It's crazy. I can't tell you how it happened, but it just did. And I am so happy to finally, after being at Gamecock Central for well over 2 years, I got my own show and we're ready to roll. So, welcome in everyone to the first episode of GC Live Sunday Reset with your host, me, yours truly, Jack Veltri. If you don't know much about me, I cover Gamecock football, men's basketball, and baseball year-round for GamecockCentral.com and have a lot of fun with it. But football yesterday, we got a lot to talk about. That is what we're going to be talking about today. It was to put it quite frankly, rough game for South Carolina. They obviously picked up the win over Old Dominion, winning 23-19. But, I mean, if you watched the game at all, you saw it was I don't want to use the word because it's not appropriate for on here, but it was a blank show. So before we get going here, just want to talk about our sponsor, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market for buying a home or you need help with your mortgage, whatever the case might be with any of your housing needs, Clint is your guy to call. He's helped out our very own Wes Mitchell at Gamecock Central, and he's even helped out former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth over the years. Clint's a lifelong Gamecock fan, a real supporter of Gamecock Central, and he does a lot of good in the community. So if you want to, any help with your home or anything, or mortgage needs, whatever the case might be, go ahead and give our guy Clint a call, 803-422-6797. Again, the number to call Clint is 803-422-6797, or you can go to clinthammond.com, and the NMLS number for him is 71597. All right, let's get into what you guys all came here for on this wonderful Sunday afternoon. And just for future reference, this show will be going live every Sunday after South Carolina plays the night before. And we're gonna be going live every Sunday. And the time frame will depend on the week, but you can usually expect it to be during the earlier parts of the day before, once NFL season starts, especially before all those games kick off and all that. But yeah, with the game, I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about, a lot to break down. And I think just my overall impressions, I talked about it a little bit yesterday. If you caught my Moving the Chains post-game video segment, you heard me, blab on for 7 minutes about how this team looked. It was not a good performance from South Carolina. Now, there's a little bit of truth to that. I think the defense performed very well. Offense, an absolute mess. I think you just look at the way the offense looked. Lenore Sellers making his first career start at South Carolina. He looked like a guy that was making his first start, a guy that had the first start jitters, whatever you want to call it. He's a guy that usually seems pretty poised, but it's just at times you saw some of his throws were off the mark. He had to run a metric ton. He had to run 22 times, and that's not. He's gonna run, but the pace and amount he's running. I mean, he almost ran as many times as Rocket Sanders did, and Rocket had 88 yards on the ground for 24 carries and a touchdown. But Lenore's, I mean, he's only 2 carries behind him with 22 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown. So it was just a very messy game. And Martin brings up a good point. Passing game was out of sync. I totally agree with you, man. It was very rough with the passing game. Just you look at some of his throws. They were, unless it was like a guy right in front of him or an easy throw to make, most of these throws weren't on target. Like, there's a pass to Nick Harbor yesterday, and that's another thing is that these receivers, and we'll get into them in a bit. That's a whole separate discussion. But with Sellers, it's like a throw to Nick Harbor, for instance. It was, I can't remember when in the game it was, but it was a throw closer to the sideline, pretty open pass. Normally, I would be wagering to say most quarterbacks would be able to make that throw with no problem. But Sellers was a little off target. Harbor did haul it in, but he stepped out of bounds. And you can't really blame Nick because the throw, again, wasn't on target. So that's kind of what we're looking at with quarterback. And William Jones says, Luke Doty at quarterback. Look, I wouldn't go that far. I did see a lot of people saying it's time to put Robbie Ashford in and all that. Let's just hit the rewind button for a second and just think about that. Robbie Ashford is going to be a fine player at South Carolina as a backup. Keyword, backup. Lenore Sellers, just think about it. A few days ago, some of y'all were probably thinking this guy's going to be the Heisman Trophy winner and he's going to be the savior of South Carolina football. Well, if you're going to turn the keys over that quickly from Lenore's to Robbie, then I just don't think that's, logical, at least to me. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, this is going to take time. I think every first game for a new quarterback is, it's not going to be 300 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, all that in the first game. It just takes time to get it going. And Bird Toffley or Two Fly asks a good question. The real question is, did he really have to run, or was it just jitters? I don't know if it was really the jitters. I just think he didn't play as well as he probably should have or can. We know he could play well because we saw it last year when he came in when the games were, pretty much, out of hand and South Carolina was winning or whatever the case might be. He played good. And I get it. It's against backups last year. But for the most part, it's like you saw what he was doing, and it was very good. But the fact that he just looked out of sync yesterday, maybe there were some nerves, but I'm not going to blame it all on jitters. And, there were times where the pocket collapsed and maybe South Carolina had a passing play in mind or an RPO, but the pocket collapsed, the offensive line, which we'll get into in a little bit here, maybe didn't block well on a specific play, and Sellers took off. That's what we're going to see this year with this team. That is just how it's going to work, and it's not surprising that he ran as much as he did, but it is also surprising and I guess this is hypocritical of what I just said, but the fact that he ran 22 times is crazy. I think maybe if I had to guess, if you asked me coming into yesterday how many times I think Lenore Sellers probably would have ran, I would have said between 10 to 15 carries because I think he'd be throwing the ball a lot more. But again, there's a big issue yesterday with these receivers, and that's what we're going to kind of turn to next. It was not a pretty day for the receivers. There's a lot of reasons why. Obviously, I don't think there was a good connection between Lenore's and the receivers. Not saying they don't have chemistry, but I don't think for one, the receivers were going to, they were not able to create enough separation. Shane Beamer was pretty open and honest saying that if you want to play here at South Carolina, you have to be able to block. And they weren't blocking well enough, guys. Perimeter blocking was not good yesterday for South Carolina, and that was a big issue. And you look at the way, the leading receiver yesterday was Vandrevius Jacobs, 2 catches for 59 yards. And Peyton Mangrum got involved. Dale Von Campbell had 1 catch. Josh Simon had 1 catch. But other than that, man, it was a quiet night for the receivers. And to talk a little bit more about this offense and just everything in general, I have brought in a special guest. And you may not remember him because it's been a little while since he's been around Columbia. Maybe you will. But I know he is a fan favorite, and you guys are going to enjoy this. I'd like to bring on my good friend, the one, the only, Mr. Mike Uva. Mike, long time no see, pal. How you been?
Better than how things looked in Columbia yesterday, huh? But a win's a win. Goodness.
That was a game yesterday, man. It was – you heard the boo birds throughout the game, and I think rightfully so, right? I think just you didn't perform the way you wanted to. You only win by 4 points. It took your defense, which, for a majority of last year struggled. And then in November, it kind of clicked for them. And it's good to see that it's translating over to this year. But, I mean, your offense, you get in the red zone twice thanks to your defense forcing turnovers. And fortunately, you scored. But other than that, man, it was a rough effort. What was your general overall assessment of the way the offense played yesterday?
Well, I went back. I get it. Naturally, you look at what happened yesterday and you want to look at the offensive linemen. I get it. I mean, that was the story last season. Certainly musical chairs, guys getting hurt. You play more than a dozen guys. I understand that. I'm not saying that the offensive line played perfect by any means yesterday, but I was very surprised going back. I mean, I watched the tape probably until, 4 or 5 in the morning. And fortunately, from knowing someone, I got the all 22 access. So I was able to see the end zone view. I was more disappointed in the blocking by the tight ends. I put it in my story today on Gamecock Central. There were 10 things that really stood out to me. It was, as I put it, it was like watching cows grazing in the grass because they were just standing in the middle of nowhere. I specifically brought up a player who I'm a huge fan of, and he's very physical when it comes to blocking. Very disappointed with Josh Simon. I actually looked at the PFF grades, and he graded out towards the bottom in blocking, and that didn't surprise me after going back and watching it. So if you go back, you watch the tape, a lot of those motion plays where South Carolina is trying to run counter, you can see Josh, and it's not just Josh, it was other tight ends as well, going up through the middle, and then boom, they don't hit anybody. And then what happens? Well, whether it be Rocket Sanders, whether it be Attaway, insert running back here, even on some of the design runs by Lenora Sellers, they weren't blocking. So I think the big thing to me is I can only imagine what is being said in that meeting room today between those tight ends and Sean Elliott, right? I mean, everyone talked about the excitement they had about Elliott returning here, the fire that he was going to bring. He's going to get that fixed. And if he can get that fixed, does that solve everything? Certainly not. But if he can get that fixed, that's gonna give South Carolina a hell of a lot more because there were multiple runs, Sellers, Rocket, again, whoever had the ball running, where it was either a 1-yard run, 2-yard run, couple TFLs. But if that block actually happens, man, you're talking about 8+ yards every carry. And that's what Beamer was talking about with the perimeter blocking. The receivers, my goodness, it was atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. So, again, offensive line, not saying they played great by any means, but it wasn't just the O-line. If you go back and you watch the plays, there were design plays where the tight end was supposed to block, and the tight end was he was hitting ghost. He was embarrassed.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, man. There's a lot to break down from what you said right there. I'll start with the offensive line. Because, again, I think a lot of people – I saw it a lot on Twitter and a bit on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com. A lot of people are going to crap on this offensive line because, last year they gave up 41 sacks and Spencer Rattler had to run for his life the whole time. And he took a lot of a beating. And you look at yesterday, you hear all the improvements the offensive line made staying in May. And then you see they get 4 sacks yesterday. And people are going to say this offensive line sucks. It's piss poor. Whatever the case might be. You saw a lot of that yesterday from fans that, expect more from this group. And honestly, there were times, man, where Josiah Thompson, who was starting at left tackle yesterday, just got bullied off the block. And Kamar Bell was another name yesterday that I saw that struggled a ton. But you're right, man. I mean, you look at the run game numbers. People are going to say South Carolina had a great day running the football. I think it was fine. But like you kind of said, Mike, with the short yard runs that could have been more, it could have been so much better. They had 56 carries for 174 yards, 2 touchdowns. The longest run they had was from Lenora Sellers, who ran for 23 yards, and they averaged 3.1 yards per carry. So it's very on par with what they did last year. The number is just inflated a little bit because they ran the ball so much more than they normally would have. But, yeah, man, they got to be better blocking. I'm glad you brought up the tight end. We heard so much about how good this tight end group is going to be. Add Brady Hunt. You have Josh Simon. You got Michael Smith coming in. Man, it was just – the overall blocking it's not just the offensive line. Receivers were awful. Tight ends weren't good enough. Your O-line was mediocre, maybe. Not as good as you hope they'd be, but there's certainly a lot of work to do. And when you face a defensive line like Kentucky next week, it's going to be tough, man. And you better hope you can turn this thing around really quickly.
And the other thing to add to that, too, and I don't want to seem like I'm just protecting, I'm shielding the offensive line by any means. If that's the case, we're screwed. I mean, I'm a toothpick compared to some of those guys. But all jokes aside, did an interview with Perry Orth a little while ago. That's going to come out tomorrow. That's going to be the first Mix in a Water Monday of the season. And we really took a deeper look at what went on with not just the offense, but specifically Lenore Sellers, young QB. I understand there's going to be people that are going to go out there and make comparisons to other young quarterbacks, whether it be true freshmen, whether it be redshirt freshmen. Well, here's the deal. If you want to play that game, why didn't every redshirt freshman that played yesterday do what Dylan Stewart did? So if you want to play that game, I can play that game with you. It's not always going to be the case. It's not always going to be. This isn't a friggin' video game, okay? So bottom line is he's a young quarterback. He was making his first start yesterday. And again, you can read the full interview tomorrow on Gamecock Central, be up first thing in the morning. But that internal clock in his head, of knowing, okay, when do I step out of the pocket and try to make something happen with my feet? When do I step up? Some of that's going to come with time simply because of the trust or trying to build that trust with the offensive line. But the other part of it too comes with just maturity, as Worth mentioned, because for a while, think about it. In high school, a lot of these young players, what they're able to do is they're able to get out of the pocket when pressure happens, and they're able to make things happen with their feet, right? So he's going to have to learn, like, hey, this isn't high school anymore. I'm not trying to compare it, but I think it's just a really good example. Think back to when Jason Brown played Florida a couple of years ago. What did he do? His big thing was, all right, when the pressure came, I'm going to roll out of the pocket. He would typically roll out to the left. He'd come out, roll backwards to his right side, roll out to the left side. What happened the following week? They had QB spies out there. So he wasn't able to do it, and they forced him to step up in the pocket. I bring that up because the maturity for a quarterback, especially a young guy like Lenoris, who, yeah, I know people were excited based on some of the things they saw in the garbage time last year and the spring game this past year and even going back to last year, but he still hasn't seen a lot yet. And he learned a lot yesterday. So those little things, being able to work on those, Jack, I felt like at times he put the offensive line, not just the offensive line, the tight ends too, who, again, I didn't feel like they played phenomenally by any means, but he put them in tougher positions to be able to block because, okay, man, here's the pressure. And he would just get out of the pocket instead of stepping up. There were times certainly that he couldn't step up, but there were times I felt like, and Perry agreed, that he bailed out of the pocket a little bit sooner than he should have. But again, it will take time. That was his first start. One QB, and I put it in a story today. I'll give you the exact quote. Again, you can read this on Gamecock Central. 10 takeaways from South Carolina's win over ODU. The exact quote was for Sellers, and this is a former Gamecock quarterback that sent this to me. It wasn't Orth. Let's see. Sellers. Trying to pull this up for you guys quick on the fly.
I'll look it up too. Here, I got it. No one will want to hear it, but that's a good win for him. Young team with a freshman QB. It's going to take time, but his nerves will settle. Is that the quote?
Yep, that's exactly it. So
yeah,
no one's going to want to hear it, and I totally get it, right? No one's saying let's go have a friggin' parade on Main Street after yesterday's performance. But what you do is you look at it and say, hey, here's the reality. It's one game in. If you want to cancel the season, have at it. I mean, there's 11 more games to go. So what you try to do is you try to look at, all right, what can you take away that's a positive? The positive is with Sellers is he was able to gain some experience. The bad news is for him, this offense, this team as a whole, but especially the offense, they don't have a lot of time to be able to correct some of these mistakes. They're going to have to do it quickly because guess what? Conference play starts next week. And when we talk about, and I know some people don't want to hear this either, bowling, right? Going to a bowl game, trying to become bowl eligible. When we talk about that, next week's game, you don't win that game next week, I don't know if I can see this team making a bowl game. And again, I know some people are going to be like, wait a minute, let's pump the brakes. We look ahead to November, though. This is one of those games South Carolina has to win. So a lot of these things, Jack, I know I gave you a lot there. A lot of these things, they have to be able to correct quickly. But certainly from an offensive standpoint, Lenore's getting that experience yesterday, even though it wasn't perfect, hopefully gave him a better idea of, okay, this is what college football is all about.
I wanted to touch on one more thing with the offense before we cut into the defense. I know we're tearing this offense apart right now because honestly, rightfully so, right? I mean, I'm glad you brought up Lenoris and the whole thing with him, running out of the pocket and stuff when the pocket collapses. And I think that's an issue eventually because, right, I mean, you're facing Kentucky next week. I think there's going to be times if he does what he did yesterday again, there are going to be times where he gets absolutely annihilated coming out of the pocket. I mean, look at the play yesterday with Dylan Stewart getting a hit on Grant Wilson that led to the fumble inside ODU territory that eventually led to the game-winning score. You see Wilson thinking, okay, I've got a lane to run through. I'm going to take it. It's on 2nd and 7. You're deep in your own territory, the minute, whatever left to play. Take it. He tries running. Stewart comes in, just crushes him, and the ball comes free. That's what I could see happening to Sellers when you face a better defense than Old Dominion. Not saying Old Dominion is a scrub by any means. I mean, we saw yesterday what happened, but, I mean, you face a better defense, and he's going to get creamed out there. But another thing, and this is kind of where I want to pivot here, how much of this is on the receivers for just not – the connection felt off to me, man. And they're never going to admit that they weren't on the same page or whatever. But it totally felt like something just wasn't there. Sellers' best pass of the day, to me at least, wasn't even a completion. It was the 50-yard bomb that he threw over the shoulder to Jared Brown. And it's right in his hands, and he just dropped it. It reminded me of when – if you go back to the AFC divisional game last year, Mike, with Stephon Diggs dropping that perfect over-the-shoulder pass from Josh Allen, it reminded me just of that. It gave me PTSD, man. And it's like, you got to catch that ball because if you catch it, it's a wide-open touchdown. Who knows what happens from there? Maybe South Carolina's offense actually looks like an offense for once and does some good things. But how much of yesterday did you feel like just the connection wasn't there? How much do you put the blame on the offense with the receivers just not doing their job to the full extent that they could have?
Well, someone in that wide receiver room needs to step up, right? We talk about video games. This isn't a video game. This is real life. So for the people that want to look at it and say, well, Nick Harbor has a 99 speed and this and that, that's great. He's still coming along as a wide receiver. And I'm not going to have any conversations about people saying, well, he should have been there in the spring. You knew what the deal was. That was part of it. If he was going to come to South Carolina, he was going to run track and field. Plain and simple. So you can't get upset by that. You want to be able to have the meal, you understand what comes with it. So that's number one. Number two, Jack, though, what scares me is this. And it's just one game, so I don't want to get too crazy. You need to have someone not only step up in that room, but you need multiple players too. And I think there's talent in there, but who's ready? That's the big question. Who's ready? Jared Brown, Jacobs, some of these transfers that came in here. Some guys that have experience, certainly Brown more than others. Gage Laverdine more than others. Someone has to step up. Because if it doesn't happen, and I'm not trying to say that this will be the case, but what yesterday looked like at times, it reminded me of 2020. And what I mean by that was 2020, Shi Smith, he had 57 receptions that season. That was the COVID season. Second most receptions on the team, Nick Muse, 30. Third, Kevin Harris, 21. Deshaun Fenwick, 14. So of your top four, only one was a wide receiver. Now, I'm okay with them doing short passes and using guys like Brady Hunt, Josh Simon, Michael Smith. Like, I'm fine with that. But someone needs to step up in that wide receiver room. It didn't feel like separation was being created. There were certainly some passes that sailed high yesterday, and I felt like there were some nerves in there from Lenore's, but at the same time, too, and it's difficult being on the outside looking in, not knowing exactly where routes were supposed to be, where the landmark route was. So if you have a comeback, if you have a drag, what's your depth? Because if you're in 2 yards, and I think this is something actually Shane Beamer talked about after the game last night, if you're running your drag, if you're running your curl or whatever, insert route here, and you're off by a yard or two, that's going to screw up everything. It's not, okay, we're throwing footballs in the backyard. I mean, it comes down to precision, timing, and muscle memory. So if guys aren't going to their spots, pass could be a little too high. So that's another thing that I'm looking at, and hopefully try to make a comparison. I know this is such a friggin' reach, but look back to last season. Patrick Mahomes, right? Arguably the best quarterback in the game right now, if not the best. He had a bunch of new wide receivers to start the year. Yeah, he had his safety blanket there with Travis Kelce, tight end, but it took time. It took time. And as the season went on, again, South Carolina doesn't have the luxury of playing a 17-game season. Conference play starts next week. They have to win next week if they want to think about bowling this year. So, again, I think the timing will get better. I think the confidence will improve from Lenore's. I think the nerves will go down. Another thing that Perry mentioned, I don't want to give the full story away, put them in a position to be able to build that confidence. Short passes. I mentioned that today in my story as well. Short passes. Take advantage of what, especially if you're going to use a lot of the motion. All right, you have some talent, you have some speed, RPO, all that fun stuff, right? Take advantage of it, especially knowing that teams are bringing down an extra guy in the box. To your point, Jack, to your point, they're not afraid right now of Lenore's throwing the ball deep. Can he throw the ball deep?
Not.
Yes, he could throw it deep. Guess what? Let me tell you something. Yesterday, I'm looking at the stats right now on Pro Football Focus. I know that there was that one pass Brown should have had. I know that. But from a passing standpoint, right, talking about depth, of the 5 plays that were actually, legitimate, because you had the penalty, you have the drop and then the penalty on that play too, only one completion of 20 yards or more. It's a 41-yard right. So 1 for 5 on passes 20 yards or more. 1 for 5.
That's crazy.
Teams aren't going to be afraid of you right now, and that's okay. Because, again, we know that Lenore's can throw the ball deep, but take advantage of getting him in a position to feel more comfortable. And guess what? You do that, you're throwing the short passes, you're running the ball with the talented running back group that they have. You do that the way that Rocket was running yesterday. Guess what? They bring an extra guy into the box. That's going to create more one-on-one matchups. You want to see Harbor go run a streak? That's how you do it. Short passes, force them to put an extra guy in the box. It's going to create more of those one-on-one matchups on the outside for you.
That's definitely what they have to do, man. You're speaking the gospel here, because
I've only covered this team for friggin' 9 years.
Literally.
I've said the same stuff like, the crazy thing about it is, Jack, and this is a story for probably later in the year. I know people are frustrated with Dal Loggins. I totally get that. Totally get it. The crazy thing is, you have to go back to the Spurrier days. The Spurrier days to find the last time that South Carolina had an offensive coordinator here for at least 3 seasons. So we're heading into year 2 under Dal Loggins. Yeah, there's a lot of transfer players. I get that. But they're still learning this playbook. And again, that's not an excuse, but that's just the reality of it. Because it looked like yesterday this team, and again, a lot of new faces, should not have looked that disorganized. Tight end should not be whiffing on some of the blocks. But that's another part of it. There hasn't been continuity offensively when it comes to play callers.
No, not at all. I promise we're going to get into defense here soon. But, with these receivers, and to your point, man, I think they do need to be running short passes more often, because it's like look, we know Sellers can throw the deep ball, but guess what? Anyone can in the SEC. Why not, at any point during that game yesterday, why didn't Dow Loggins try to get some slant routes in there, some shorter passes, maybe dump off to a Juju McDowell, who I felt like really didn't get involved the way he, his skill set leans towards. But another issue with this receiver room, and Dow Loggins essentially let it be known a few weeks ago where they were at. He said it was going to be by committee this year. Is that a surprise? No, because Xavier Luedecke was your top target last year, and then there was everyone else. This year, it's like, who's your top guy going to be? And the problem with it, from my perception, is Loggins literally said no one has been able to separate themselves yet. And you could think of it as a good thing, like, okay, everyone's really tight-knit, they're competing, everyone's on the same level. But you can also think of it like as a bad thing where, okay, no one's been able to take that next step, make the strides that they're supposed to be. Nick Harbor, we've heard so much about him from this damn video game where it's like, everyone's expecting him to be a world beater out here. I'm going to get to the video game in a second because there's something I want to talk about with that. But you look at what these receivers are supposed to do, and it's just not happening out there. Creating separation seems to be an issue. Catching the ball, even going back to the scrimmages, seems to be an issue. Blocking's an issue. I mean, where is there light at the end of the tunnel with the receiver room? And I also have a feeling that maybe because we didn't see all the short yardage plays yesterday and stuff, maybe Dow Loggins just doesn't want to open up the whole can of worms for a game against Old Dominion. That's just me being optimistic.
I'd want to tend to agree with you, and maybe but I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is you have to go out there and you have to try to get some type of rhythm, right? Because you go into game one, the playbook itself isn't going to be as there's not going to be as much you're going to have to do. You're going to simplify things to an extent, especially when you're going up against the opponent, like you said, Old Dominion. You look at a game like Georgia versus Clemson yesterday. It's going to be probably a little bit more advanced, or even going back to last year, South Carolina versus North Carolina in week one, you're going to put a little bit more into it. Having said that, though, I think what this offense ultimately wants to be, we saw what they did yesterday, and that's what they were trying to do. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want people to think like, all right, what South Carolina was doing yesterday, it's going to look completely different the following week. I think we have a good idea of what they want to do. They want to use a lot of motion, especially with the tight end. They want to be able to counter. They want to be able to do some trap plays. But more than anything, they want to be physical. And I know that sounds silly for me to say it because they didn't show that yesterday multiple times. Again, offensive line, Casey Henry, he missed the block on one play. I think it was in the third quarter. And this is, again, outsider looking in. There could have been a missed assignment, and it might not have been on Henry, but it felt like he was the only one in the vicinity of. So that's why I'm saying that should have been him. And he down blocked, and that led to a free man coming off the edge, and he just blew up Sellers. Outside of that, I thought Casey Henry did a really good job.
He did fine yesterday.
He looked really good early. I know the offensive line, again, is going to get picked apart. And as I mentioned before, it wasn't just the offensive line. Guys like Simpkins at times got blown back a little bit, but he also did some good things. Josiah Thompson got blown back a little bit. By the way, not sure if you put this out there, Shane Beamer on his TV show this morning mentioned that the reason why Josiah came out early in that first half is because he got poked in the eye. That's why he was on the sideline. That's why he was on the sideline, and then he returned later in the game. So it had nothing to do with performance, according to Beamer. That show is taped immediately after every game.
That's right.
Even after every game at night, and then it airs the next morning. So that is what Beamer mentioned. Worth mentioning that about him. But the other thing, too, they need to be able to get that blocking on the outside that we talked about with the perimeter. This is a team that I feel like can run the ball down teams' throats. Yes, it was Old Dominion yesterday. I get that. Yeah. But there were things that we saw from Rocket Sanders, who, again, you want to talk about gaining confidence. Rocket goes out there, runs for just shy of 90 yards after having surgery on his shoulder a couple months ago. People always think about, all right, is he good to go? It's the mental side of it, though. They don't think about that. He was able to take some hits yesterday. Yes, he took some hits in fall camp, but he was able to take some hits in the game yesterday, Jack. That's only going to help him next week. But again, blocking, not just the O-line. Tight ends need to do a hell of a lot better.
Yeah.
Wide receivers need to do a lot better. Think about some of those blocks. If a wide receiver was able to just engage a little bit longer and just engage at all, because, again, we saw a lot of whiffs, wide receivers and tight ends included. We're talking about the difference between a 3-yard run with Sellers, potentially a 15-plus yard run. There were so many cases like that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, man. You're hitting the nail on the head with all these points you're making, and I appreciate you, again, hopping on. But last point I want to make about this whole offense, and we've talked for 30-plus minutes about it, just because it really was the story of the game yesterday was the defense. But the other side of the story, from a bad perspective, really was this offense. I mean, when I was writing my instant analysis story yesterday, where I break down the good and the bad from the game, if you read the story, a lot of the good, honestly, probably 100% of the good, was what the defense did. And you look at all the bad, it was what the offense did. And one point I want to make here, and this is just how I feel, as someone who's played the video game now, College Football 25, and Mike, I don't know if you've played it yet, or whatever the case might be. You look at South Carolina. I think they're a very fun team to play with in the game, right? Lenore Sellers, you could scramble out of the pocket with him whenever you want and run for 50 yards. Nick Harbor, just run a go route, and he'll beat the receiver or the DB downfield easily. My issue with it is that I think the game, for one, it's never truly realistic because it's more like an arcade-style video game compared to real life. But I think people that play that video game, the amount of people that play that video game, they talk about Nick Harbor, 99 speed. Oh, he's going to be insane. Nick Harbor didn't do squat yesterday. A lot of these guys, it's for South Carolina's offense, outside of the run game, didn't do squat yesterday. So my worry is that people's perception of this offense is based on how well they do in the video game. And I think that's an issue because you're playing the video game. It's like, oh, man, I'm excited. Nick Harbor, he's going to be running go routes all year. He's going to be scoring 15 touchdowns. And Leonard Sellers, he's going to be running for 2,000 yards. He's going to be passing for 4,000. We're on the right track, baby. But, man, it really just did not look anything like that. And I think people's expectations about what this offense did in a freaking video game is way too high compared to what happened in real life. What do you say about that?
Yeah, there's a reason why it's friggin' esports, So that's not to say Nick Harbor is not a special athlete. We know that he's extremely quick. We know that he can jump through the roof. But if you've been paying attention, even going back to his recruiting process, I've been saying it, Wes, Chris, others who follow recruiting and have followed Nick, he was a tight end and defensive end in high school. And he was making a jump and transitioning to play wide receiver. He was a 5-star athlete, not a 5-star wide receiver, a 5-star athlete. I don't want to make up numbers here or stars and say, okay, he's a 3-star or a 4-star coming out as a wide receiver, because I don't think that would, it doesn't make any sense. It is what it is, right? If someone wants to do that, have at it. I'm not involved when it comes to all the star rankings, but, and I mentioned this when you took off a little while ago, Jack, anyone that's upset that Nick wasn't here in the spring, it's just like, this is what you signed up for. That's like me complaining that I'm being back here in New England and it starts friggin' snowing in the winter. I know what I'm getting myself into. You knew what you were getting yourself into with Nick Harbor committing to your football program. He's going to do track and field.
This was known from the jump, man. And with Nick, it's like, and not to cut you off, man, but it's like, I'm glad you brought up the point again about him not being here in the spring. And also, let's not forget, like you just said, this guy did not play wide receiver in high school like that. Okay. It's not like he was Mazio Bennett coming out of high school, 5-star wide receiver. He's a 5-star athlete, in all caps, athlete. So that meant, he's playing defense, offense. He's a do-it-all type of player. But to have the attributes that a normal wide receiver like Mazio Bennett or, Jared Brown would have, it's not all there yet. He was working on his pass catching a ton this offseason. And that's obviously an issue for him, is catching the ball. If he can get that down, maybe he'll be more involved in this offense. I do worry, though, he'll never live up. He's never going to live up to the potential of what people expect from him at South Carolina. And the video game just didn't help with that because he's one of the best players in the video game, 82 overall, 99 speed. He's a cheat code, literally. But it's just, I don't know if it's going to translate over. It probably will not.
It's not even just the consistency or lack thereof when it comes to catching the football. From the people that I've spoke with, going back to the beginning of fall camp, he's made improvements with catching the ball. It's a little bit more consistent than where it was a year ago, but he's still, he's still dropping passes here and there. The other part of it, though, from talking to people inside that building, is he is improving his route running, which, again, never played wide receiver, played tight end. So, yes, he's fast, he's quick. But guess what? You could be the quickest guy in the world. If your route running isn't as smooth, people always talk about how Jerry Rice ran a 4.6. And yet he was one of the best route runners. You could be the quickest guy in the world, but if you're not smooth with your cuts when it comes to getting in and out of routes, you're not going to be able to create separation.
No.
So we can sit here and say, all right, they should just run Harbor vertical, vertical, vertical. Again, this isn't a video game. In a video game, yeah, it's probably going to work multiple times. You'll probably put up like 3 or 4 touchdowns. That's great. Be player of the game in a video game. That's phenomenal. That's not how real life works.
No.
So I think more than anything, being able to have a guy like Mike Furry and being able to work with him as the season goes on, I think we will see a big improvement from Harbor. But as far as what the expectation should be on him right now, man, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time. So other guys, whether it be Mazio Bennett, who I think is one of the smoother route runners on the team, especially based off his age, he's very advanced. And I've been saying this going back to last year, where he did a breakdown on a couple of his routes. Very advanced for his age. He understands the why, as I always talk about. He understands the why. So I think, again, things are going to work out with Harbor. I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah.
But as far as right now is concerned, man, yeah, you need to be able to have some of these other wide receivers step up. Plain and simple.
Yeah, man. For sure. All right. It is now time to transition into something that is slightly not as egregious to talk about because the defense, in my opinion, look, I haven't done grading the Gamecocks yet, which I'll do tomorrow morning on GamecockCentral.com. Every week I go ahead and grade every position group for South Carolina and how they looked on Saturdays. The defense, say what you will, I'm going to go out there and just say I'd probably give them like a B+ right now. They had a hell of a day yesterday. 4 turnovers, 4 forced fumbles, 2 of which were recovered. Let's start off the edge, man. Kyle Kennard, Dylan Stewart. We've heard all about Dylan Stewart for the longest time now. 5-star freshman across the board. Very good get off, great speed, great athleticism. He's everything you want. And he lived up to it yesterday, in my opinion. But let's not sleep on Kyle Kennard, man, because he's a veteran in that room. He had 2.5 sacks yesterday, 4.5 tackles for loss. He was a monster out there yesterday. And I think it's very exciting to see what they have coming off the edge, and honestly, just in general with that defensive line, because they were just about as disruptive as many would have expected them to be, if not more.
Kennard lived up to the hype. Let's start with Kennard. We talked about him a lot this spring in the spring game notes that we put out on Gamecock Central. Two of my reports, the name that was brought up the most was Kennard. Kennard. And he picked up where he left off from that last scrimmage a couple weeks ago. He is as advertised. He is the type of player that comes in here. He's a veteran, and he looked like that. He's played Power 5 football. It showed out there. He has power, speed, and length. And I know it's something that we talk about with a lot of these edge players, and we can say the same about guys like Desmond Umeozulu, especially Dylan Stewart, right? I know Brian Thomas was hurt yesterday. He wasn't out there. He's more of a guy that doesn't, his speed has got a little bit better, but he's just very technically sound when it comes to his craft and understanding the techniques. But with Kennard, my goodness. And here's the beauty of it. Let's say Dylan Stewart plays more next week, or let's say Brian Thomas is back next week and he looks like the Brian Thomas that we saw in the spring game this past year and some of the things that he did towards the end of last season. And of course, going back to the previous spring game in 2023, at some point, offensive lines and just offensive coordinators as a whole, they're going to have to decipher who are we going to pick up? Are we going to pick up Kennard, or are we going to worry about Dylan Stewart? Never mind the fact that there's some talented defensive tackles. Now, USC bounced back and forth as we expected, them playing their 4-2-5 look as well as their 3-3-5. I felt like their 3-3-5, and it's not going to surprise people, that's where they were really, really coming after them. They did some good things in the 4-2-5 too, but you could see ODU really struggled. Again, another thing that Perry Orth and I discussed today that will come out tomorrow, Mixing a Water Monday, the challenges for not just a quarterback, for an offense when you're bouncing back and forth from a 4-man front and a 3-man front. So some really good stuff from him that will be shared tomorrow on Gamecock Central. They're going to have to decipher who they're going to pick up. They're going to have to decide, are we going to commit to the edges, which I feel like a lot of teams are going to do. And if they do that, the defensive tackles, or if there's only one, or middle linebacker, if they're sending them on a blitz, they're going to have to win their one-on-one matchups. It's going to create more one-on-one matchups. Yes, there's going to be teams that will play zone, have a zone blocking scheme offensively, but there's going to be teams too that are going to say, hey, we have to slide the protection. If we're going to do zone, we might have to slide it one way, and it's going to create mismatches on the backside. If they want to help out and be able to stop both edges, it's going to create more one-on-one matchups through the middle. So it's one of those things. We always say how football is a chess match. This is truly going to be a chess match as the year goes on. And I think with the talent they have, especially at that edge, in that edge room, but just the defensive line room as a whole, that front six, since they play a 3-3-5 and a 4-2-5, there's really going to be a lot of matchups that I think are going to create nightmares for opposing offenses. And, the other thing too, Jack, one last thing. I put this today in the Gamecock Central story I did. They played well. They showed us everything that was being advertised about them from a trait standpoint. The speed, the physicality, the nastiness. They had a couple breakdowns. And as I titled in one of my tidbits, I wrote, when the defense stinks, they let it be known. And what I mean by that is their breakdowns are so bad that it doesn't just stink up one room. It stinks up the whole house and the kitchen.
Yeah.
And the garage, excuse me. Stinks up the kitchen, house, garage, everything. So the good thing is those are things that can be easily corrected. They're correctable. Defensive backfield, right? Miscommunication. Crossing routes. We saw that yesterday with DQ Smith. Eyes. Where are your eyes? Are your eyes in the backfield when they're supposed to be? And we would typically number the guys from, outside in. So 1, 2. Where's the 2? Is the 2 going out? Is the 1 coming in? And you have to know that as a safety. You have to know that as a nickel as well, corner, the communication part of it. So again, little things that can be corrected. If they can fix that in the back half of their defense, their front is just so talented that it's going to be able, as I've mentioned this before, kind of like makeup, it'll cover up some of those blemishes in the back half of the defense.
Oh, yeah, man. And here's the thing with this defense. I mean, you're right about that with Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard coming off the edge. Teams are really going to have to pick and choose who goes up against those guys, because not everyone's offensive line is going to be good. You're going to have a weak spot maybe at right tackle compared to left tackle, where you have a guy that's good over there, and you're going to have to figure out, okay, who do I want blocking Kyle Kennard versus Dylan Stewart? It really is a nightmarish matchup, just like you said. But again, I think this defensive line, it all starts with them. We knew coming into the year they were one of the better groups in not just the SEC, but in the country. But it is the other parts of the defense where it's like, okay, if they come along like they should, this defense really is going to win a lot of football games for this team. We saw it yesterday. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw it again versus Kentucky next week. Like, if South Carolina is going to beat Kentucky next week, it really is going to come down to, okay, what does this defense do? Because the offense, it's still a work in progress. And that's why we've seen it all throughout these scrimmages and stuff leading up to now, where it's like the defense is well ahead of the offense. But one issue that has been brought up in these comments a lot so far, and I'm not surprised, DQ Smith yesterday. And we'll get to the secondary in general, because they did have 2 interceptions. So shout out O'Donnell Fortune and Jalen Kilgore stepping up big, making some nice plays. But man, DQ Smith, we saw it last year. He got burned on some plays. His freshman year was pretty solid, I'm not going to lie. But last year, a little bit of a step back. He gets beat on that 72-yard pass to Isaiah Page from Old Dominion. And, someone made the good comment that, DQ was doing the cha-cha slide or whatever the case might be. It was not a great day for him yesterday. Where do you feel like DQ's at right now? And just, are you concerned? Is it something where it's just like it's first game of the year, he'll be all right? Or is it a tendency that just carried over from last year where it's like he's got to figure it out, man?
Here's the thing about not just DQ Smith, but about South Carolina secondary, especially when we're talking about the safeties, that's different this year in comparison to last year. There's some real competition in there. So, and DQ knows that. If DQ doesn't step up, guess what's going to happen? Jalen Kilgore is going to go back there. Kilgore will be the starting safety. Now, Kilgore did some good things last year. All right, we saw that early on when Nick Eamon-Worry went down game 1 against North Carolina. But if he's not stepping up, it's going to be next man up.
Literally.
It will be next man up. And the other thing about that is, and this was one of the issues last year, right? They weren't able to find someone that they trusted at that nickel spot. I know Emery Floyd wasn't out there yesterday, banged up, but you have guys that have experience playing that position. You also have guys that are really talented. Jalua Solomon, and he's been able to continue to learn the position. So if that continues to be an issue, if that continues to be an issue, you have someone else back there. On top of it, and I don't know necessarily if he's ready to play safety, and this isn't, like disrespect against the kid. I mean, he's a true freshman. We've heard a lot of good things about him, but it's different from doing things in practice and is he game ready? Especially, talking about defense, not talking about special teams. David Busey's been doing some good things. I don't know if they're ready to put him in a situation where he's pushing.
That's a lot to put him in there right now.
So again, this isn't hitting the panic button, but what I'm trying to make light of is, God forbid DQ Smith does have some issues this year. And I think, again, the stuff that he did yesterday, it's very easily correctable. You can get corrected easily. If he has struggles, though, Kilgore would be thrown into the mix. ASAP, especially if they feel more confident about players playing that nickel spot. Now, what makes me believe that? I think there's some guys that we heard some good things about in that nickel spot. but it comes down to actually seeing it in the game. If they're struggling in nickel, now you got to pick your poison. Are you going to roll the dice and put DQ back there because you feel more confident of having Kilgore, Jalen that is, at the nickel spot? Pick your poison.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. And look, I think with DQ, it is an issue, right? And I think if he doesn't turn around, let's say next week, he gets burned again by a receiver or just something where it's like you're looking at like, dude, what the hell are you doing, man? Then it's like, okay, I think there's a little bit for a little more cause for concern. And then at that point, South Carolina hypes up their depth so much that you hear about every week. Maybe it's like, okay, you put someone else in. Someone brought up the point. Coleman Evans brought up the point. What's up with Gerald Kilgore? Didn't see him. I didn't see him either. Playing at least in the game, really. We saw Jalen making the big plays and all that, but if push comes to shove, give a guy an opportunity, man. DQ, we get it. He's been here since 2022. Freshman starter, played last year. He's been along with the ride alongside Nicky Minwari. We get it. He's been here for a while. But man, this is about winning football games. Sorry, like if you're not performing, you got to you pull the plug and move on to the next guy. See who else can get in there and make plays. And if it has to be a David Busey, okay, let's see it then. But again, I worry a little bit about the secondary because, man, I think they're going to be fine stopping the run. But it is those long passes like we saw last year. They could get beat on some balls, and it gets ugly. So that's something I definitely do worry about. But overall, though, man, I think the defense had a nice game yesterday. 4 turnovers. You were very disruptive up front. That was the big thing. Pass rush looked good. All that. Secondary just got to be a little bit better. But overall, man, what's your final word on the defense, and what does it take looking a little bit ahead to next week? We're not going to really preview Kentucky yet because that's a discussion for next week. But with Kentucky, I mean, would you make any specific changes next week defensively to further enhance how this defense might look and play?
No, I mean, I would just continue to keep that competition high in that safety room, which I'm sure they're going to continue to do. But I think if anything, what we saw yesterday is that there is a lot of truth to the rumbles that we heard all offseason about this defense, that they are fast, they're physical, they're going to be very disruptive, especially off the corners, right? You look back to last season for the majority of the season. And again, I know it's just one game. It's against ODU. I get that. But for the majority of last season, especially before the month of November, South Carolina really struggled to create TFLs. I think maybe in that Mississippi State game to talk about Furman, but like the majority of the season before turning the calendar to November, they struggled to create those tackles for a loss. So we saw that yesterday. Again, against ODU, I get that. The team who last season led FBS when it came to sacks. I understand that. But at the same time, too, kind of like with Dylan Stewart, are you going to apologize because of the competition you're going up against? No, if anything, you're able to go out there, build confidence, knowing, hey, what we're doing schematically, it can work because we did it in week 1. Now let's do it week 2 against better competition, right? Going up against Kentucky. No one's saying that they're world beaters, but the competition is going to improve in comparison to where it was yesterday when you played Old Dominion. But I think the other thing, too, Jack, that I would say is that this team now has shown that they have the ability to play the style of football that they want to. I know that there are a lot of people, even going into the offseason, but especially going into November, before South Carolina switched things up and went to that 3-3-5 look, they were like, hey, I'm done with Clayton White. Things changed up defensively. And what have we seen since then? We've seen South Carolina play some really good defense. Again, there were a few breakdowns yesterday, few inexcusable breakdowns, but that falls back on the players more than anything, right? You have to be able to do what you got to do. Your eyes have to be in the right place. You have to communicate. I know I'm picking on DQ a little bit, but he needs to be able to execute. We talked about this last year with the safety blitz. I keep going back on it. I'm sorry to bring back PTSD moments here for people, but that safety blitz on 4th down against Florida.
Yeah.
If DQ doesn't lose contain and keeps the quarterback from getting outside of the pocket, South Carolina wins that game. And if they get that win, they finish with 6 wins in the regular season. They go bowling with the possibility of winning 7, and the narrative is completely different. Even after a day like yesterday, the narrative is completely different.
Totally.
So that's what it comes down to, is just executing. This team defensively, they have the dudes. They have the scheme that fits them to be able to play well. Now it just comes out to executing, plain and simple. I know that might sound like coach speak, but it's the truth.
Oh, it's totally true, man. And totally agree with you on that. Lastly, I wanted to hit on special teams before we get out of here pretty soon. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in and commenting away. It's this is where the time where it's like, look, here's the thing about yesterday. The way we're talking about this game, you would have thought South Carolina lost. Like, that's the thing. But they found a way to win. And I know no one wants to really hear the positives of the situation, but it's the truth. And someone has to say it. So I'll be the guy to say it. They found a way to win yesterday, despite all the nonsense that went on that field yesterday.
How many times did we see South Carolina? I felt like last year they were in situations like that and they found ways to lose. And again, continuing to hammer and promote this for tomorrow, Perry Orth coming on Mixing the Water Monday. Perry mentioned it. Again, PTSD moment to think back to 2015, right before I got here against the Citadel. He brought that up.
Man.
It was just like, there's a difference. Is anyone feeling great in that building today? Certainly not. I know Beamer said, hey, we're going to celebrate. Yeah, they should celebrate the win.
Why not?
You only get 12 Saturdays, okay? You only get 12 Saturdays, and for some of these guys, it's going to be their last time ever playing football. So you enjoy that. You're putting all the work in the offseason. I know fans don't want to hear that. Some fans, I should say. I don't want to categorize all fans.
No, definitely
but
not.
The point being is you found a way to win. You found a way to win. Look at that Florida game last season. Ugly, 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 ugly. You make that one play.
You win.
That one play, though, it's still ugly, but now you're going bowling.
So that's
where I'm trying to get at with this. Long season. They need to clean up a lot, and they need to do it quickly if they want to even think about going bowling, because, again, you have to win next week. With the way this schedule plays out, you have to win next week. So you do that. You put yourself in a much better position to be able to compete, I feel like, moving forward. We're talking about bowl games and all that fun stuff. But more importantly, and I don't think everyone's going to be won over if they win next week, but I think it will win back the majority of this fan base who is either, I don't want to say out on Beamer, out on this team, but there's more. Put it this way. The number of text messages and phone calls I've got since yesterday, I haven't seen frustration like this during the Beamer era. I'll put it like that. I've been covering this team since 2016. I've been covering the SEC. This is my 10th season. I haven't seen it like that. However, we've seen with this team in the past, and I say this team, obviously it's a new year, but this under Beamer, where they have a game like this, and then the next week they just come out of nowhere, and it's just like, where the hell was that last week?
Literally.
So honestly, to me, I wouldn't be shocked to see South Carolina come out and play very well and beat Kentucky, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see them get beat pretty bad. I mean, that's where things are. This is a team that obviously it's heading into week 2. It's still early, but that's the vibes I'm getting. That's how I feel about this team, that they can come out there next week and they could go out and beat Kentucky, and everyone's going to be like, where the hell was this last week? Wow, look at Sellers. Man, he looks like the Sellers that everyone was hyping him up to be. And then I could also see them go there and struggle. But I think, again, the defense played a big, big, big role in the win yesterday. There's no question about it. Talk about Harbor, that tackle on that interception. You want to talk about the interception Kilgore had at the end of the game. Harbor doesn't make that tackle. That doesn't lead to the interception by O.D. Fortune. And that could have been the difference. And we could be sitting here today talking about South Carolina coming off a loss to ODU.
Oh man. Columbia might burn down if that's the case. But I will say, man, I agree with you. And we'll get into special teams, I promise. But this team, they are a true wild card week after week. You might not want to hear. You might want to think. People literally commented to me, man, like, oh, this team's going to go 15-0. They're going to be 10-2, whatever the case might be. The reality is with South Carolina, they are a mixed bag. You never know what you're going to get on a week-to-week basis. The quote is like what from Forrest Gump? Like life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. This team, you never know what's going to happen. They may come out and be what they were against Tennessee 2 years ago, or they might come out and be what they were against Florida last year. So you never truly know with this team what you're going to get. But one thing I will say is I think they're going to be fine. It's just, again, I think Dowell Long is next week. You know, I saw an article from years ago. Apparently he was rated as the worst offensive coordinator in the NFL when he was with the Bears. And I'm not saying this is Marcus Satterfield level of bad with play calling, but I tend to believe there's just stuff that we're just not seeing. I think the playbook's going to eventually open up.
And Jack, can I real quickly, and I've mentioned this a couple times before, and this isn't to be, on the defend Dowell Loggins wall, and I'm not saying this is towards you. I hate the people that look at what Dowell did in the NFL and they're like, that's what he does in college. It's like, if that's the case, Nick Saban's an awful football coach then.
Literally.
He was awful as a head coach in the NFL. So it's just like, he certainly needs to change things up. I think there are things that he wants to do with this offense, but he has to, and he's mentioned it before. And he did it with Spencer. He did it with Spencer where he talks about, okay, there's things that and I'm paraphrasing here, there's things that I want to do, but I have to work with what I have, right? We talk about this analogy, and it's not the best analogy, but, you can't go into a kitchen thinking that you're going to cook filet mignon if all you have is a Snickers and a box of Fruity Pebbles. You got to work with what you have. And that's not to say South Carolina only has a box of Fruity Pebbles and then a Snickers, but they need to be able to go out there. And again, another thing that Orth will talk about tomorrow, Mix in a Water Monday, they need to be able to just build his confidence up. Short passes. I mean, I know Gamecock fans, it feels like, for goodness, even going back to the Muschamp era, have been looking for short passes, slants, the quick game, just getting the ball out of the quarterback's hand. But especially now more than ever, knowing that you have a quarterback that is as dynamic as Sellers, put him in a position where he can get the ball out of his hands quickly, because it's going to play off of the fact of the RPO, being able to run the football, and it's going to force defenses to put an extra man down in the box. And that will create those one-on-one matchups on the outside for you. It happened last year. When South Carolina was able to start to run the football with Mario Anderson, what did we see? We saw teams come down. And that's not to say South Carolina's offense was perfect by any means last year, because certainly they had their headaches and they went through their growing pains. But you saw the one-on-one matchups, because I think there were some people saying, why the hell is Xavier Legette in one-on-one coverage? It's because you had to pick your poison. Mario Anderson started running the football well, so teams had to step down and put an extra guy in the box. Same deal with Lenore's dual threat quarterback. If he's able to get the short game going, guys are going to step up. Short game's just an extension of the run game. So you do that, teams are going to put an extra guy in the box, and those one-on-one matchups on the outside are going to be created. And I have confidence in Lenore's being able to hit those deep balls. He did it yesterday, just wasn't caught. Nothing that he could do, but he put the ball exactly where it needed to be. Brown just needs to come up with the catch.
Totally. And I think, to your point on the offense, it's like with the steak analogy, right? Let's say South Carolina does have a steak. You put salt and pepper on it. Just enhance it, man. Put more seasoning on it. Put different spices on it. Let's cook this thing up. Let's make it right, and let's add more to what they've got. It's not what they have. It's not what they're doing isn't wrong necessarily. They're going to be a run-first football team. We knew that. They hyped it up all offseason, ground and pound, this, that. But it does come down to what the receivers are able to do. If you catch some of those passes, we're talking about a completely different game yesterday. If Nick Harbor keeps his foot in bounds, if Lenore Sellers is a little more on the money with some of his throws, if Jared Brown, we've talked about it over and over again, catches that pass, we look at this game completely differently. So it's not that they need to change everything up, especially after a win, which is a good point. I don't think they're going to need to reinvent the wheel. They just need to further enhance what they're doing. I think that's the key. But quickly talking about special teams for a minute, because I think that gets lost in all of the hoopla with offense, defense, everything. Alex Herrera, I thought for the most part, looked very good at kicker yesterday. He missed from 48, and that was his final field goal. But overall, 3 of 4, looked very good. And then I was surprised, and I guess not really, because it is Beamer ball at the end of the day, and they saw something in the tape Shane Beamer was talking about afterwards. The fake field goal. I know it got called back, but it is a good sign to see that it is still alive. Like, Beamer ball exists. Special teams is an emphasis, and it's good to see right out of the gate that, if that penalty wasn't a thing, Kai Kroger has another touchdown pass under his belt.
There were a couple things special teams wise. Obviously you're talking about, Torricelli Simpkins, the illegal man downfield on that play. I mean, shoot. Brady Hunt got a little lucky there. It looked like he was bench pressing out.
Yeah, that's the thing. That was a crazy.
You take it, man. You take it. But the other part of that, though, is on the block punt, there was one earlier too, and we knew ODU, and I put it in my keys this week on Gamecock Central that one of the keys was going to be playing soundly on special teams, because you're going up against one of the better special teams units in the country. ODU, and I know they mentioned it in the broadcast, but I put it out there earlier in the week on Gamecock Central on Thursday to the keys of the game. Since 2021, the Monarchs have blocked the second most kicks in college football in FBS. So this was truly going to be a special team slugfest. And South Carolina was able to pull a fast one on them. Unfortunately, one of those self-inflicted wounds. So got called back. But the other part of it is there could have been multiple kicks that they allowed, some punts. So I think the other part of it is, Jack, is just the different styles. If you notice yesterday, a lot of the punts, and I know you saw the shifting, right?
Yeah.
More of that NFL style punt, more tight, as opposed to the shield punting where you see guys spread out. Now, what's the difference, right? I mean, there's some people that will understand this. Some people might not know what I'm talking about. NFL style punt, everyone's a little bit tighter, and you have your pass, you have your personal protectors back there to help you out. Pretty standard. In your shield punt, the way that you're blocking players is based on spreading the returners, the return team out. So you spread out, they're going to have to line up against you, because if not, throw a fake. Real easy. So you're able to create that time to be able to block by shielding, right? Putting everyone out, spreading them on out there. It's new for South Carolina. Obviously they did everything under the sun with Pete Lembo, but they did more shield punting. So that was something I noticed yesterday. And again, ODU, very good when it comes to special teams. I don't care who it is. I mean, they are just very, very good when it comes to special teams. Number 2 in the nation when it comes to block punts, block kicks as a whole since 2021 for a reason. And they showed that yesterday. But that needs to get cleaned up. Because I've seen it happen before where teams struggle going from the shield to the NFL style punt, the tighter look. And if you're not disciplined, man, or if you're just not tough, you don't do your job, you're going to see what happened yesterday happen over and over again. So I don't know. That's one of those little things I'm interested to see if South Carolina opts to go into a shield this week.
Yeah.
But if they don't, they need to be tighter. And a person that was really good for them, really good for years, was to carry on Joyner. I know Joyner, once he was playing running back, he wasn't on there. We saw some issues at times with special teams, but he was a phenomenal personal protector. They need someone to step up at that position.
No, they totally do. You really keep hitting the nail on the head, man. I really do agree with you. I think special teams, if you had to rank how each side of the ball looked yesterday, defense obviously 1, special teams 2, and then offense 3. And I think that's what everyone's going to say. But yeah, special teams, look, it could have been worse. I think Juju McDowell catching punts back there is fine. I think Jalen Kilgore was out there catching punts. So again, it's all rotating, and it's just about finding the right pieces and plugging and playing the right way. And I think despite this being an ugly first game, I think they're going to figure it out, and I think they're going to get it right. But final point I wanted to hit on today, Mike, before I let you get out of here, this is called Sunday Reset for a reason, and we're going to hit the reset button before jumping into next week. Why do you feel like this team's going to be fine? Because a lot of people are worried I think a lot of people, myself included, I don't want to get your predictions for what the overall season looks like. I have them going 8-4 this year. I think that might change now. A lot of people are going to think this team is on the verge of 2-10, fire beamer, this, that, everything under the sun needs to change. But why do you feel like, despite everything bad that happened yesterday, they're going to come out of here being fine and move on to next week, and they got a lot to prove?
Young quarterback being able to go out there and get his feet wet by starting in a game. And to me, more than anything, to have an opportunity to do that against an Old Dominion, as opposed to, say, a North Carolina, right? Or going up against one of the better teams in the country. No disrespect to ODU. I mean, they held their own yesterday. Give them credit. I know people don't want. I feel like I'm kind of like Beamer up here now saying that. But it's the truth. So to be able to go out there, it was not a pretty game by any means, Sellers included, but you got the win. And you're able to go back and watch the film knowing, hey, we got to clean a lot of things up. But, man, we got lucky. We dodged the bullet there.
Yeah.
We're not sitting here watching this film trying to correct things coming off a loss. We got to win. We're one step closer to becoming bowl eligible. It's a long season, but I was able to get my feet wet as a starter. And there were things that going into this game that I probably played out in my head and I thought we're going to go a little differently, or I try to do things a certain way where instead I should have done this, right? What's the old saying? You zig, I zag. So, the zig and zag, I zigged and I should have zagged. So, great comparison there. So again, I think things are going to be all right if he's able to learn quickly. But again, it's that quickly part. It's that quickly part because you don't have time to take that deep breath. Now, here's the beauty, and I've been saying this all friggin' off season. Another thing that should make you feel better about this team, every team in the country is going to have about this team. Young quarterback, a lot of new faces on offense. Guess what's happening for the first time in a long time, Jack? You have 2 byes. You have 2 byes in the season.
Yes. It's going to be a game changer.
So to have those 2 byes, not 1, 2, it's going to allow this team to reset twice. Again, every team in the country is going to have that luxury. But for a young team with a young quarterback, I think it could help them out tremendously. The defense, I feel fine about the defense. I'm not worried about the defense. Offensively, though, take advantage of those extra reps in practice where you're able to really focus on yourself, because that's what a bye week does. Yes, towards the end of that bye week, that idle week, you're able to look ahead. So in a couple weeks when they have to get ready after week 4, you have that matchup. Okay, you have a bye, and then you get ready for Ole Miss. But that's going to be key. So we will see.
Yeah. Mike, appreciate you on your Gamecock takes. One thing I will ask you, though.
Traffic cones, big red.
Yeah, traffic cones.
I hear what you're saying. Road cones. I mean, I don't know if that's a Southern thing, just like calling a grocery cart a buggy. My girlfriend always says buggy. I'm like, what the hell is a friggin' buggy? So.
Oh, man, buggy. It's a shopping cart.
I know.
It is. Now, I want to ask you about this because I know, unbiased reporter, all this stuff that you talk about on Twitter. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Clemson.
Yep.
What did you think about the way the Tigers played yesterday? Did it surprise you? 31-3? I mean, they looked awful. 34-3. Awful yesterday. What did you think?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, Georgia showed why they're one of the best teams, if not the best team in college football. I mean, there's some really talented teams this year, certainly from the SEC, right? It always goes that way. I would say the 3 teams that I'm really paying attention to in the SEC, Texas, Ole Miss, and Georgia. We'll see what happens with Alabama, but those 3 in particular are the ones that I'm paying very close attention to. And for Georgia, they went out there. It was slow to start, but then they were able to pick things up. I think for Clemson offensively, we've heard a lot about Cade Klubnik and whether or not he's going to be the guy there. And we can talk about the lack of transfer portal usage and not starting anyone from the transfer portal since the portal became a thing in 2018. I know that was mentioned in the broadcast yesterday of that Clemson and Georgia game. More than anything, though, I think there's a couple things. One, Georgia's just really good. Yeah. Georgia's just really good. Number 2, I think Clemson offensively, I think that even though they went up against a very good Georgia defense, I think they still have some issues that they're trying to work through offensively.
So many.
But I think, I don't want to sit here and be like, all right, they went up against Georgia's defense and they're going to be much better than what they showed yesterday. I think they're going to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
And you're going up against one of the better defenses in the country. But at the same time, too, this has been an issue for them going back to last year. So I think with anything, with where Clemson is, obviously South Carolina, they need to worry, as my old colleague at Watch Fox, Mitch Brown, would say, worry about finishing the food on your plate. Worry about the food that's in front of you. Don't worry about going up and getting a second helping or looking over and, what's on everyone else's plate. Just worry about what's on your plate first. And when you finish that, then you can worry about that. So it does. We'll have to wait and see how things play out this season. Yeah. But at least after 1 week, makes that game interesting. That's the biggest takeaway. That's the biggest takeaway for me is that it's still early. Teams are going to figure each other out, right? South Carolina, in my opinion, will get better because they've done that the last couple of years. Clemson, I believe they're going to get better, right? I think they're going to get better. I mean, they're not playing world beaters. The ACC has improved over the last couple of years, but it's not the same in comparison to what the SEC and what South Carolina has to go up against, especially this year, but every year. I think we will see a very competitive game towards the end of the season. But again, that's just my week 1 thought.
It's so early to say.
I could change that after next week. If South Carolina gets shellacked, I might change that.
Man. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, man. Yeah. You hope it's competitive at the end of the year. But Mike, I appreciate you hopping on, man. Do you want to just plug yourself with what you're up to lately? We know you're not really full-time at Gamecock Central anymore, but you're still with us. Even if you're out in Rhode Island, where can people find your work outside of just Gamecock Central and what you've been up to?
Yeah, it's been good up here in Rhode Island, working for WPRI, covering not just the Patriots, but some of the local colleges and high schools out here. High school football hasn't even started yet. I know that that's different from the South. My dad up in Massachusetts, they don't start till this upcoming week, at least for first game. But yeah, we've been up here. We've had a chance to be able to catch up with a lot of the former Gamecocks that are playing for the Patriots, continuing to see Marcellus Dial a lot. Kevin Harris, I'm glad that the Patriots were able to keep him. I thought he should have made the 53-man roster after his performance in those preseason games, especially that third preseason game, but got waived, brought back on practice squad. I know that some people aren't going to be happy when I mention this other name, Jaheim Bell. He's up there as well. I will say this about Jaheim, because I think some people are just instantly over him, and I totally get it. From just talking to him, there seems to be a lot of maturity in comparison to what I saw towards the end of his time at South Carolina. And I don't think Jaheim's a bad person by any means. I think he had way too many people in his ears towards the end of his tenure at South Carolina. And I think he got a lot of bad advice, which led to him falling in the draft to where he was. Because, I mean, if he stays at South Carolina, I think he would have been used a lot more than what he was used at Florida State. But on top of that, I think some of the concerns from a character standpoint, which I think get overblown a little bit. I just think there was just way too many people in his ears. I don't think he is a bad person. I know he pissed off a lot of people, though, on the way out over there, and I get that. But again, I think that was an extension of people in his ears, telling him, hey, this is what's best for you. And it doesn't make an excuse for him, but I feel like with college football, we're seeing that a lot, especially with the NIL era. And there's people that are getting in kids' ears saying, hey, this is what's best for you, when they're really just looking out for themselves. Yeah. So I'm not going to get into specific names, but I've been very impressed with Jaheim. I actually did an interview with him that's up on WPRI.com. He's given a lot of credit to South Carolina from the conversations I've had both in front of the camera and away from the camera, from being able to learn things. I know he learned multiple playbooks during his time in college, obviously jumping around from South Carolina to Florida State, but he played for 3 different OCs. So that's something he gave a lot of credit to. And, look, it is what it is,
It's in the past.
And Frank mentions here, we had our chance to use Bell properly. We didn't. And that's another part of it. I would have loved to have seen what Bell could have done in Dal Loggins' offense last year. Now, here's the thing. With the way South Carolina's offense was at times, right? You had guys like Josh Simon, who probably were going to be used more in the passing game. They had to block. They had to be in more to the line instead of being detached as a tight end, because South Carolina needed all the help in the world they could get on the offensive line. But I don't know. It is what it is. It's water under the bridge.
Yep.
It was an ugly divorce, if you want to call it that. It was an ugly split. But from talking to him, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I get the feeling that, I wouldn't say he would do it all over again. He would have done it differently, Yeah.
Mike, appreciate it, man. Mike does a great job for us still at Gamecock Central, even though he's out in Rhode Island, living his best life, going on great walks with great views. And, yeah, man, you're doing a great job over there. Appreciate you, brother. And
we need, I know we got plenty of time. We need to start putting together, and it sucks that it's on a friggin' Tuesday.
Yeah.
I'd love for a bunch of Gamecock fans to come up to Boston for that BC game.
That'd be sick.
I don't cover Boston because we're down in Providence. We're going to be covering a lot of PC hoops. Speaking of PC hoops, former Gamecock, also former Providence Friar. I saw that Devin Carter was back in Columbia. Kerry Rich, the captain, posted that, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
But and how about this? A little connection. One of my first weeks here, I'm doing a story about one of the local teams here. I'm trying to make sure I say the name right. Jamal. So I'm doing a story here about one of the teams, and Joe Mazzulla's old high school basketball coach up here, and the current AD of a school called Bishop Hendrick. And we started talking, and I told him, I said I came from South Carolina. I was down there. He's like, no kidding. He's like, I'm dropping my daughter off. She's going to be a freshman in South Carolina. So
interesting.
Lots, let me know. Yeah. So Joe Mazzulla's old high school basketball coach, who still coaches up here. So I don't know.
That's
maybe
cool.
I mean, if you want to talk about finding a way to piss off the locals, maybe we can create a pipeline from Providence, because that school in particular, they've produced a lot of friggin' talent.
Oh yeah,
talent's gone on to go play for PC, Big East basketball. So I don't know if we can bring that pipeline down here to South Carolina, give it to Lamont Paris. We'll see what we can do. But I'd love to get Gamecock fans up here for that BC game, because that'd be fun. That'd be fun. We could put something on together.
Totally, man.
Event. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be sick, Mike. Appreciate you hopping on, man. We will get you on soon enough again for this. You're the inaugural guest, so I appreciate you hopping on, buddy. And
our set low.
Yeah, come on, man.
Hey, tomorrow, Mixing a Water Monday.
That's right, Mixing a Water Monday.
First thing in the morning. Thing in the morning. It will be posted at, I'll give you the exact time, 8 a.m.
8 a.m.
Eastern time, depending on where you're reading this and watching this. Eastern time.
Mike, you're the man, brother. Appreciate you. And, have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And look forward to NFL season with the Pats, man. It should be fun to watch.
As a Bills fan, respectfully, go blank yourself.
Oh, man.
We're keeping this show PG. But number 2, it's
going to be a year.
Well, kind of like the Gamecocks, the Patriots have a pretty good defense. They just have some question marks on offense.
They do.
A little bit more offensively,
Yeah.
but hey, it is what it is. And man, I wish Xavier Legette ended up here, but the Panthers traded up. So it is what it is.
Ah, man. Mike, appreciate you, buddy. Take it easy, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right. See you, Mike. And that was my good friend and coworker, Mike Yuva of Gamecock Central. Man, he was awesome to talk to. Hope you guys enjoyed that. That was a last-minute type of surprise put together this morning. And glad Mike could hop on, provide some insight, and, makes things easier when it's not just me talking to a wall here for 90 minutes like we have. We've really gone on long. In the future, shows probably won't extend this long, but in the rare circumstance, and you hope the rest of the season is not like this, where South Carolina just wins games or even loses games like this. You just hope it's not like this every week where it's like we got so many problems to talk about. You hope there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it is good to have weeks like this where you can, like the show says, hit the reset button and just look with a glass half full, whatever it is, for the week ahead. But so this show is going to air every Sunday. There's not like a specific time it will air. It'll change on a week by week basis. And this is a great point. Frank says no drama, no show. The show will still go on, but yeah, I mean, the drama definitely helps. And Philly fan says, I love you, kid. I don't know if this is in reference, but whatever. I love you guys too. You guys make this show a lot more fun. And so we're going to be going live every Sunday. No time set in place. I'll let you guys know when it happens, and we'll go from there. It just depends on the week by week because I'm traveling. You got NFL on, all this stuff. But yeah, hopefully every week doesn't feel like a loss. I think that's a great way to put it. So this is a lot of fun. First episode. We got a long way to go in this season. South Carolina is back on the road next week, and they'll be at Kentucky, 3:30 p.m. on ABC next Saturday. And Shane Beamer will be hosting his teleconference call tonight at 6:15 p.m. And you can look for live updates on GamecockCentral.com about all that. So, and Big Red asks, are you going to do a pregame show as well? I thought about what more I can do, and this was the best alternative to a post-game show because obviously Mike and one of our former interns did a post-game show after every South Carolina football game. It was a lot easier because we had them, but because I'm not going to say we're shorthanded, but the fact is we just don't have, the ability to do that right now. So this is the alternative to that is going live on Sundays, the day after the game, a day after you can actually process your thoughts and talk about everything with a clean, fresh perspective. And so pregame show, if you guys want that, let me know on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com. I'll run a poll, maybe seeing if that's something y'all want to do. It's just, views might not be there the way we want them to be. So that's probably the biggest thing, just being honest about that. But if you guys want a live show before the games and the time permitting, I'm down to do it. So whatever you guys want to do, we're here for it. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to check back in next Sunday after South Carolina plays Kentucky, and hopefully we are talking about another win. Take it easy, guys. Happy Labor Day, happy Sunday, and I will see y'all next week.